Mehdi Hasan is editor-in-chief and CEO of LBCHost news platform. Thanks for coming on the programme, Mehdi. It's good to see you again. I wonder what we're to make of these reports.
You know, every now and then a political exchange comes along that completely cuts through the noise. And this one does exactly that. Before we dive into the full story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Because what you're about to see isn't just a routine interview. It's a full-on demonstration of what happens when someone walks into a polished, comfortable media setting and refuses to play by the unspoken rules that keep difficult truths tucked neatly out of sight. Mehdi Hasan sits down with Tom Swarbrick on LBC, and from the very first moment, you can almost feel the clash of approaches. Swarbrick leans on the familiar centrist toolbox, the soft hypotheticals, the carefully balanced on the one hand, on the other hand framing, the kind of mild pushback designed to seem fair without ever disrupting the narrative too much. But Hasan? He is not there to entertain polite ambiguity. He shows up with facts, with quotes, with documented statements, and he holds them up plainly, refusing to let them be brushed aside as speculation or misinterpretation. While so much of the mainstream conversation tries to soften the edges or shift uncomfortable realities into theoretical territory, he pulls everything back into the realm of what's actually being said, actually being done, and actually being justified by those in positions of authority. This is what it looks like when someone rejects the performance of balance and insists on clarity. When someone refuses to let extreme statements be treated as harmless rhetoric. When journalism stops tiptoeing and starts doing what it's supposed to do, confront power, not cushion it. If you're tired of political conversations being watered down until they mean nothing, stick around. This is the kind of coverage built for people who still believe truth should matter, and who aren't afraid to hear it said plainly.
Mehdi Hasan is editor-in-chief and CEO of LBCHost news platform. Thanks for coming on the programme, Mehdi. It's good to see you again. I wonder what we're to make of these reports.
I mean, I would say don't be surprised by these reports. Some of us have been saying for 22 months that this was the goal, that this was never about hostages, this was never an anti-terror operation. This was an excuse by the Israeli far-right, which controls the Israeli government right now, to use the horror show, the massacres, the war crimes of October the 7th, to go back into Gaza and take back the land. It's always been about the land for these folks. And they're not hiding it. They've been saying it for months. And now Netanyahu's saying what his own cabinet ministers have been saying for months. Every time I came on a show like this and cited a cabinet minister, someone from the pro-Israel side would say, well, they're not the prime minister, they're not the main person, they're not in the war cabinet. Well, now you've got Netanyahu being quoted by security sources saying that this is the plan. They're doing it. They have a green light from the president of the United States. And this is what many of us warned about and worried about.
I guess part of the answer, or could be, unless you're right, that the whole aim was to reoccupy Gaza, that if Hamas were to release the hostages, there would be, one would have thought, no logical need to go and reoccupy the whole of Gaza until they do.
So a couple of things. I mean, we've been in hostage negotiations on and off for 22 months, especially since last summer when Joe Biden put out that plan and it was supposed, they blamed Hamas and the UN were involved and we've had back and forths. We had a ceasefire, let's not forget, Tom, earlier this year. Donald Trump, a man who I don't like to give credit to for anything, came into office shortly before he was sworn in, got this ceasefire. Some of us warned it was a fake ceasefire. It lasted only a couple of months because the Israelis never planned to stick with it. And Israel unilaterally broke that ceasefire, went back to war, imposed a siege, blocked infant formula and nappies from going into Gaza, and we are where we are. Israeli ministers, Tom, just to be clear to the LBC audience, say again and again that the hostages are not their priority. Those are not my words. The finance minister has said this. The settlements minister has said this. The heritage minister has said this. In fact, last week, Eliyahu, one of the ministers in Netanyahu's government, said we are racing ahead to totally destroy Gaza. We're going to make it all Jewish. I mean, there's no mention of the hostages in that statement. They have a very clear ideological goal, and, when people tell you who they are, believe them the first time.
So what do you see as if there is, what is the day after this war looking like, more and more, in your view?
Yes, that was a question posed. I mean, I've been talking about this since the very beginning, both when I was, I had my show at MSNBC, and then I've been doing interviews like this. And when I'm asked that question, the assumption is the war is ending, and I don't think the war is ending. I think Netanyahu, for both political and ideological reasons, is dragging this out. His own generals have told him there's no strategic value in dragging this out. I don't know if you saw on Sunday, I think it was, 19 former Israeli security chiefs, the heads of Mossad, Shin Bet, the military, the police, have come out saying there is no strategic goal here. We are not winning this war. We have not saved the hostages. This is about Netanyahu trying to save his own backside from going to prison. This is about him preserving his cabinet. So the premise of your question is slightly problematic because it implies there is some end point when the Israelis have made it clear there isn't an end point. This is full-on ethnic cleansing, and the President of the United States has given them a green light.
Recent history, relatively recent history, suggests it doesn't go well if you try and occupy a part of the world that is fundamentally hostile to you, to the forces that are going to attempt to occupy it. You'll be in something close to a forever war.
Yeah, which is what. So two things. One is you're right, and that's why so many military chiefs and experts are saying we shouldn't be doing this. There is no military value in occupying Gaza in this way. That's one point. The other point, of course, is that let's just be clear again for the LBC audience, just to understand the law here. Gaza is occupied according to the International Court of Justice, according to the United Nations. Even though the Israelis pulled out their, even though the Israelis pulled out their settlers in 2005, they removed the settlements from Gaza. They controlled Gaza's air, land borders, waters, who goes in and out, what goes in and out. So that's what the Gazans have been under for a siege for a while. Both Gaza and the West Bank are occupied under international law. What Netanyahu's proposing to do now is going an extra further and annexing Gaza, making Gaza part of Israel. And of course, here's the key point, which is what the world cannot tolerate, I hope, which is ethnically cleansing 2 million people from Gaza. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the Balkans, Tom. Like, ethnic cleansing in Europe was seen as the greatest crime since World War II. The Serbs were the bad guys. Milosevic went to The Hague. This is what Israel's doing now on steroids.
One would have to disagree with your premise that this was the goal from the start in order to argue this, but let's, for argument's sake, walk it through.
Okay.
That if Hamas were to surrender and were to disarm, there would be no need, in theory, for Israel to worry about the security threat coming from Gaza if the organisation that committed terrorist atrocities on October the 7th ceased to exist.
Yeah, but I mean, if it ceased to exist, sure, but like, that's not how international politics works, right? You can't just fantasize a solution and make it happen. They do exist, right? They do exist. They are fighting. They haven't been destroyed by Israel. I mean, Israel's failed in its own goals of destroying Hamas. If that's a goal you support as an Israeli or supporter of Israel, it hasn't happened. That's why these 19 security chiefs are speaking out. The 19 security chiefs who are speaking out, the former heads of Mossad, they're not pro-Hamas, Tom, are they? They're not someone. Sure. No one would accuse any of them. They're saying that this is a war that isn't working, right? If anything, it's helping Hamas. Some of us said this on October 8th, 9th, 10th, 2023. If you do this, all you're doing is you are perpetuating the violence. If you kill thousands of Palestinians, leave thousands of Palestinian children orphaned, what do you think they're going to do other than join Hamas?
A rejection
if you destroy Hamas.
Yeah.
You don't think?
But was that a rejection, Mehdi, of any attempt by Israel to kill the people who committed October the 7th? Were you implacably opposed to any sort of?
Not at all. Not at all. No. Not at all. I think that, look, again, Israel as a country was always going to respond to October the 7th. It would be ridiculous to think that Israel was going to do anything. The issue is how you respond.
Of course.
And those of us who had seen Israel in 2014, in 2009, in 2018, remember, the world did not begin on October the 7th, Tom. We have precedents. We have history. Israel's been bombing and besieging Gaza for decades. The 2014 war, they killed hundreds of Palestinians, including kids. None of us, even I didn't imagine it would be this brutal, this prolonged, this destructive. It's an actual full-blown genocide at this point. So the question is, can Israel respond when its citizens are killed in a horrific massacre? Of course, every country should have a right to protect its citizens from being massacred, but no country has the right to do a genocide as part of its counter-terror operation. That's what you want to, or B, revenge. And again, this was always about vengeance. There's been reporting in the Israeli media, Tom, that from the very beginning, they were bombing sites that they were told there might be hostages there. And they said, we don't care. If you read the reporting from Plus 972, they were saying, we don't care. It was never about the hostages. hostages. It was about vengeance. It was about using this as an opportunity to go and try and destroy Hamas. It was about taking back the land.
Obviously, you use the word genocide there. That is an opinion rather than a fact of the court who have to rule on that for now. Can I ask you about another area?
It's the opinion. It's the opinion of most genocide scholars who have looked at this.
Yeah. Can I ask you about something separate that you did, which I saw the other day, a debate you did on YouTube? You really you went in for some real self-flagellation by debating. Was it 20 or 25 sort of far-right guys? One of whom outed himself to you.
Self-flagellation is a good term.
Yeah, one of whom outed him to you as a literal fascist who described the Holocaust as, and I'm quoting now, a little bit of persecution. I read that man has now lost his job. He's been sacked. I wonder what you make of that.
Well, I'm not sure what to believe about that, because some people online have pointed out that Connor, I think his name was, the self-proclaimed fascist who came to debate me on the Jubilee YouTube show. He claimed to have lost his job. He did that thing that lots of right-wing people do where they're like, oh, look at me, I'm the victim. He did a fundraiser, made lots of money from his far-right friends. Turns out, according to some people, and I don't know how true this is, that actually he lost his job earlier this year, and he used this as an excuse to say, I lost my job because of what I said. By the way, I should point out, he was crying about free speech, free speech. This guy and many of those people who I debated on that show astonishingly don't support the Constitution, don't support democracy, don't support free speech. So it's a little bit hypocritical when they then reach for free speech as a defense.
Now let's slow this moment down, because what you just heard reveals the deeper problem with how major media outlets talk about Gaza. The exchange starts with Tom Swarbrick asking what we should make of these reports about Netanyahu considering a reoccupation of Gaza. And right there, you can already see the framing taking shape. It's presented as if this is breaking news, as if everyone is suddenly discovering this possibility together, like a fresh headline that needs cautious examination. But Mehdi Hasan instantly disrupts that narrative. He reminds Swarbrick and the audience that this didn't come out of nowhere. Analysts, journalists, and policymakers have been warning for nearly 2 years that this direction wasn't hypothetical. It was openly discussed. And that's the crux of the issue. Mainstream coverage often treats ongoing patterns as isolated surprises instead of connecting them for what they are, long-standing strategies communicated by officials in plain language. Israeli cabinet members have repeatedly made public statements about their intentions. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich has said the hostages are not the main priority. Heritage Minister Amichai Eliyahu made extreme remarks about Gaza. Just days ago, another minister spoke openly about plans that would fundamentally change the territory's future. These statements aren't leaks. They aren't rumors. They're documented remarks made by people in positions of authority. Yet instead of dwelling on those facts, Swarbrick moves to a familiar hypothetical. If Hamas released the hostages, then surely the idea of reoccupation wouldn't make sense. And this is where the conversation shifts into something that looks neutral on the surface, but subtly redirects responsibility. It's a way of suggesting that all of this could be resolved if only one side behaved differently, while sidestepping the decisions already made by the other. Hasan refuses to let that framing stand. He reminds Swarbrick that there was a period of calm earlier in the year. A ceasefire reached with international mediation. And what happened? Israeli leadership resumed military operations, tightened restrictions, and blocked basic humanitarian goods like infant formula and diapers. These are not military items, they are essentials for civilian survival. That context matters when discussing responsibility, but it rarely gets centered. He also brings up credible reporting that Israeli military officials internally emphasized that recovering hostages was not the primary objective. That's not speculation. That's sourced journalism. And yet, instead of grappling with those documented positions, the conversation keeps shifting toward imagined scenarios. It's a pattern we've seen before in political debates across many issues. When direct evidence is uncomfortable, move to hypotheticals that change the emotional direction of the discussion. You can see this pattern in other policy conversations as well, especially in the U.S., where similar rhetorical moves are used when discussing policing or systemic violence. Questions get reframed around what the vulnerable should have done differently rather than what the powerful actually did. It's a formula that looks reasonable at first glance but consistently shifts attention away from the actors with the most control. Hasan then highlights assessments from former Israeli security officials, individuals with decades of experience, not activists or outsiders, who publicly warn that the current course does not serve a long-term strategic purpose. They argue that political calculations are influencing military decisions. These are serious claims from high-level insiders, but rather than examining those assessments, Swarbrick pivots again to another hypothetical scenario about surrender and disarmament. The problem is that these hypotheticals ignore reality. Israel's own commanders have acknowledged that eliminating Hamas entirely is not achievable through military force alone. Meanwhile, the human toll in Gaza has escalated dramatically. Tens of thousands of people killed, the majority civilians, and critical infrastructure, homes, hospitals, schools, water systems, severely damaged or destroyed. Conditions like these do not eliminate movements. Historically, they fuel further instability. Then comes the moment that reveals the philosophical divide of this entire exchange. Hasan uses a term to describe the scale of devastation, and Swarbrick immediately pushes back, saying it's an opinion until a court renders a final decision. Technically, that's accurate, but politically and morally, that framing delays recognition of widespread expert warnings. Scholars in genocide studies, United Nations officials, and human rights investigators have publicly raised alarms about the risk and scale of what is unfolding. The International Court of Justice itself ruled that the situation was grave enough to require urgent protective measures. Waiting for a final ruling does not negate the seriousness documented by global experts. This insistence on procedural neutrality, on withholding language until the perfect official moment, is part of a wider pattern in centrist commentary. It prioritizes cautious phrasing over clear moral assessment. And while that approach aims to avoid bias, it can also minimize the reality people are living through. It creates the impression that taking a stance is more dangerous than the events themselves.